Hello guys, it's Morshockman1000 here, and today I'm going to present 7 arguments for Christianity against atheism. Before I start this video, I would like to define a few things. I define atheism as the belief, idea, or worldview which states that God or gods of any kind do not exist. I define an atheist as a person who does not believe that God or gods of any kind exist. And this video is a sequel to my first video which also discusses arguments for Christianity, and I will post the link to my first video in the description down below. So these are my arguments for Christianity. Argument number one: the death and resurrection of Christ has multiple eyewitness accounts and could actually be proven in a court of law. In my country, if a claim has multiple testimonies or eyewitness accounts that do not conflict with each other, the court of law would actually accept the claim and consider it valid. Like the death and resurrection of Christ has multiple eyewitness accounts, such as the four Gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All four of these Gospels mention that Jesus died by crucifixion and that he rose again from the dead. But what if the four Gospels were actually written by one person so that people would think that different people wrote them? Well, first of all, no scholar, theologian, or historian that has ever lived believes in that idea. Second of all, the four Gospels all have differences in writing styles, vocabulary, and word choices, which indicates that they must have been written by different people. For example, John's style of writing is simple and short but very deep and profound, and one word in John's writings could have very deep meanings, such as the Greek word logos in John 1 verse 1. Luke's writing style is better, more advanced, and he uses a lot of idioms. And because Luke was a doctor, he sometimes uses medical terms when writing about stuff like Jesus healing someone's hand. And Mark's writing style is more rigid, and Mark uses Greek that is less advanced and less poetic compared to Luke or Paul. And Matthew's writing style makes some words less wordy and less repetitive than in Mark. All of these facts point out to the idea that there is no way that the four Gospels were all written by one person. It must all be written by different people due to the differences in writing styles, writing skills, vocabulary, and word choices. I mean, the Gospels do have some minor differences, like some of the Gospels kept some stories and events that occurred in other Gospels, but all of the Gospels never contradict each other, and they all mention the important and essential things such as Christ's crucifixion, death, and resurrection. Argument number two: this was mentioned outside of the Bible by the historians Josephus and Tacitus, which confirms that Jesus is a real historical person who once lived in this world and died. Let me quote what Josephus said about Jesus. About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who performed surprising deeds, and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. So Josephus' account of Jesus confirms that Jesus was a real person. Jesus was a wise and great man who was adored by many people. Jesus convinced many Jews and Greeks to believe in him, and Jesus performed quote-unquote surprising deeds, which could refer to miracles or supernatural actions. Let me quote what Tacitus wrote about Jesus. Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called the Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city as of hatred against mankind. End quote. So Tacitus' account confirms that A. Christians were persecuted and attacked by Nero. B. Christians were named after Christ. C. And Christ suffered under Pontius Pilate and was crucified by Pontius Pilate. If Jesus was just a fictional character that was invented by the Gospel authors, why did historians mention him and write about him as if he's a real person? Argument number three: the liar, lunatic legend, or Lord argument. Basically, this argument states that there are four possibilities regarding Jesus. They are: Jesus was a liar who lied about being the Son of God, which resulted in him getting crucified. Jesus was an insane man who legitimately believed that he was the Son of God. Jesus was just a fictional character who never existed and was completely made up by the gospel authors. And the last possibility, Jesus is the Son of God and he did die on the cross for our sins. If Jesus was just a liar who lied about being the Son of God, what kind of person would die brutally, painfully, and humiliatingly just for a lie? What kind of person would willingly go through so much suffering, torture, humiliation, and a very brutal death and also endanger his loved ones just for a lie? Would you publicly declare, "I am a reincarnation of Prophet Muhammad" in the streets of some Islamic country if you and your family would get stoned to death for saying that? Would you lie about beating Minecraft in 1 minute if an angry mob of gamers would burn down your house for saying that? Would you lie about body swapping with your soulmate if a comet would strike your tongue for saying that? That's a UNM reference, by the way. No, of course not. To do those things, or even attempt to do those things, would be foolishness. If Jesus was just an insane man who legitimately believed that he is the Son of God, psychological experts claim that the way he spoke and acted and reacted is not how an insane man would speak or act or react. Therefore, there is only one possibility. Jesus is the Son of God. He did die on the cross for our sins. But what if the Jesus that is portrayed in the Gospels isn't the real historical Jesus? Well, let's go back to my first argument, which talks about multiple attestations. There are four Gospels in the Bible, and they all attest the same things about Jesus. So the Jesus portrayed in the Gospels must be the historical Jesus since there are multiple attestations of it. Number four, there are possibilities regarding the resurrection of Christ. Possibility number one, Jesus' body was stolen. Possibility number two, Jesus did not actually die on the cross, he survived it, and therefore he did not resurrect. Possibility number three, Jesus did die on the cross and he did rise from the dead. If Jesus' body was stolen, it does not make any sense. His tomb was covered by a very large and very heavy stone, and his tomb was also guarded by multiple armed soldiers who are heavily trained, skilled in combat. So it is very, very, very unlikely that some guy broke into his tomb and stole his body due to the high security and the large stone that guarded his tomb. And if Jesus did not actually die on the cross, but instead survived and woke up again, hereby not actually resurrecting, it does not make any sense. It would be impossible for Jesus to survive the torture, the injuries, the blood loss, and the crucifixion that he received from the Romans. Jesus was struck with whips called flagrums that contained sharp bones and pieces of metal which tore open his flesh and made him lose a lot of blood. Getting struck by a flagrum is a very painful, very brutal, and horrifying, and most of the time lethal punishment. A historian even commented that he ever saw a guy getting struck by a flagrum until his backbone and bowels were exposed. Yuck. And other than the whipping, a crown of thorns were also pressed against Jesus' head, causing him to bleed, and finally he was nailed to the cross and his body was stabbed with a spear and blood and water gushed out. And medically, it means that someone has died. So the idea that Jesus somehow survived all of that makes no sense. Number five. If Jesus never rose from the dead and the resurrection of Christ was completely made up by Paul and the apostles never actually happened, what would Paul or any of the apostles gain in doing that? How would making up a story about them being converted from wickedness to Christianity and Christ resurrected from the dead benefit them? If the writers of the New Testament just made up the resurrection of Christ, they would just bring more shame to themselves. For example, in Galatians 1 verse 13, Paul admitted that he persecuted the church and tried to destroy it. And previously, before Paul converted in Damascus, he did not believe in Jesus at all and hated Jesus. So if Jesus never rose from the dead and the apostles just made it up, the apostles would just bring shame to themselves in vain, and no one would do that. No rational person would do that. The point is that what would the writers of the New Testament gain in making up a story about Jesus rising from the dead? Argument number six: if Jesus never rose from the dead and the gospel was just a fictional story that was made up by the apostles, why were the apostles willing to be persecuted and brutally tortured and killed just for a lie? Preaching the gospel is actually what got them persecuted and killed. Argument number seven. Scientists found an ancient papyrus, an ancient Egyptian papyrus called the Ipuwer papyrus, and this ancient papyrus described some of the plagues that are mentioned in the book of Exodus, such as the river turning to blood, darkness all over Egypt, livestock dying, and the deaths of the firstborns. Yeah, the tenth plague. So the Ipuwer Papyrus, this ancient scroll, it confirms that the plagues in Exodus did happen.